On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're continuing our Atlantic Division review by stopping up in Canada once again. We talk about the Montreal Canadiens. Let's jump right into it.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for making this your first listen of the day. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for making this your first watch of the day. On this episode, we talk about the Montreal Canadiens continuing our review of the Atlantic Division. Now, there was a post, I'm just going to clarify real quick. There was a post on our Twitter page that said this was our Atlantic Division wrap-up. That is not true. We have one more team, and that is the Buffalo Bills. So stay tuned for that feature. We'll be dropping that next week. So on this episode, obviously the Montreal Canadiens. Now, I'm not going to talk about the projected lines because when I spoke about the Toronto Maple Leafs, a lot of Maple Leafs fans on YouTube had a lot to say about that, about how I got the lines wrong, about this and that. But if they would have listened to the episode correctly or intentively, they would have known that I got that information off of Daily Faceoff, which, if you are not aware, projects the line combinations for all 32 NHL teams. And of course, those lines were projected back in July. Now, a lot has changed from the time that was put out till I believe it was last week or the week before. I don't remember when the episode dropped. So I'm not going to talk about projected lines. I'm only going to talk about with the Montreal Canadiens, what they did last year, what their expectations are going into this year, kind of a little bit of a recap as well as what happened last year. So let's talk about last year. The Montreal Canadiens through 82 games went 22-49-11, totaling out to 55 points, and that resulted in them getting the first overall pick in this last year's draft. And we're not going to talk about that player because I don't think he's going to be up right away. He is a very talented player, but I don't think that we will see him right away. I would be actually very shocked if we see him up right away. But looking at this Canadiens team and looking, I said I wouldn't, and I'm already going up against myself. And looking at the combination, it's just a reference for me. If you want to follow along on Daily Faceoff, go ahead. So looking at this team, looking at, and these are a little bit more up to date. These were put out on September 26th. So a little bit more better of a reference as opposed to the ones that Daily Faceoff gave the Leafs. And really, I have to say, looking at this team, there is potential for them to have a good year. And what I mean by a good year compared to what was done last year, 55 points, by no means is a good year for any NHL team. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you are the Montreal Canadiens. I don't care if you are the Arizona Coyotes. I don't care if you are the Philadelphia Flyers or the Seattle Kraken, who, by the way, had a better year in their inaugural season in the National Hockey League than the Montreal Canadiens, who have spent over a decade in the NHL. Well, over a decade in existence as well. But, there was a lot of, and if you're just joining the Lightning party for the first time, thanks for joining us. Better late than never. We have a lot to look forward to on this year, but just as a little bit of a recap, in case you forgot or you're not aware, these two teams played against each other not too long ago in the bubble. The last time, not in the bubble, when the Lightning won their second of two straight Stanley Cup championships. And there was I feel like a lot of expectations at that time, well, not a lot of expectations, excuse me, for Montreal, not only to get to that point, but to even win that series. And they put up a tough fight. The games, even though the Lightning did not sweep them, they did win in five. That was still, in my opinion, probably one of the more tough series. Now, we're not up until that point. I'm not talking about at the Avalanche. I'm talking about up until that point. That was a tough series, as I felt like, the year before they played the Stars, and that was just a whole weird experience for everybody involved. You didn't really get, in my opinion, the Stanley Cup playoff experience that we're all accustomed to, back and forth on the road, at home, where this was kind of, you're just in one place, and then the Lightning head over to Edmonton. Um, but yeah, I just feel like the expectations nonetheless for this Montreal Canadiens team were very high. Now, that could be just because of the going into next year, because they went to the Stanley Cup final, and for some franchises, we've seen this in the past, where they're that team that not really anybody expects to do anything in the playoffs. Most recently, the Kings. That's probably the best example I could think of in this moment. Um, but one of those teams you don't expect a lot from, still young. And then they get into the dance. They make it all the way to the Stanley Cup final. They played the defending champions. And yeah, like I said, I thought that was a tough series because I felt like the Lightning at any moment, especially on the road in Canada, that's always tough. Um, a team like that who's young and on cloud nine at that time, I think that's a team that's dangerous. Like I said, very reminiscent to me, at least, and I'm sure some people in the comments on YouTube are going to think differently. But you got hot goaltending, and prime Jonathan Quick in LA during those two cup runs, I think is a lot different than what Carey Price did during that run. Given that he played very well in net, um, his team just didn't play very well in front of him in that Stanley Cup final. They lose in five, and then going into next season, into the following season, last year, like I said, expectations I think were high for a lot of Habitants fans, and they completely crapped the bed. And really, in my opinion, when it comes down to and their GM paid the price with his job. When you look at and the coach as well, when you look at the team now, even I think that, and you have a lot of players that are starting the year with some sort of injury. Jonathan Drew and Justin Barron, Jake Allen, Carey Price. So right away, with the Canadians, you're out two goaltenders. I'm not really looking at Jake Allen thinking that he's anything to worry about in terms of if he's gonna be the number one guy. I think it's gonna be split in net between him and Montembeault. But really, what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of work that needs to be done with this Canadians team. I don't think that you're gonna do much of anything. Are they gonna have a good season as a whole in terms of an improvement from last year? I think, yeah. I don't think that they're gonna repeat 55. I'd almost be shocked. I think that when you look at a team, they have look at this team. They still have good players. They have Cole Caulfield, Nick Suzuki. You have Brendan Gallagher, Evgeny Dodanov, Kirby Doc. Josh Anderson. There were some good moves. Joel Armia, Jake Evans, Jonathan Drouin. There is a lot of talent, and like I've stated on past podcasts, whether it be about this Lightning team or whether it be about other teams in the Atlantic Division, it's you could have all the talent in the world. Really, what it comes down to is having that talent come together and building that chemistry on the ice, which you don't see a lot of. And I don't think that, granted, who knows? Maybe the Marty St. Louis effect will continue this year and we will see more progress out of this team, because we did see the Canadians, in my opinion, improve. And maybe that's a little bit of, that favoritism towards Marty St. Louis, whose jersey is right behind me. Um, Maybe we'll see a little bit more of that improvement continue in the 2022-23 season. So we'll talk more about the Montreal Canadiens, my expectations for them in the Atlantic Division in just a little bit. But first, I want to talk about our sponsor for this episode, and that is SimpliSafe. Now, the numbers don't lie. In the last decade, over 4 million people have chosen SimpliSafe house security to protect their home. You don't earn the trust of that many people without doing something right. At SimpliSafe, your safety is the only thing that matters. I know because I use SimpliSafe in my own home. They protect you with cutting-edge security technology powered by 24/7 professional monitoring agents who always have your back. With 24/7 professional monitoring, SimpliSafe's agents call you the moment a threat is detected and dispatch police or first responders in an emergency. Even if you're not home or can't be reached, that can't be beat. That kind of service is absolutely fantastic. SimpliSafe blankets your home in protection with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door, HD security cameras for inside and outside your home, smarter ways to detect motion that only alert you when a threat is real, and even hazard sensors that instantly detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. So you could customize your perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplisafe.com/locked-on NHL. Save 20% on your SimpliSafe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month free. Visit simplisafe.com/locked-on NHL to learn more. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. So back to the show, continuing our talk about the Montreal Canadiens, I think that will be, if we had to sum up the team, uh, really a bit of an enigma, I think, in the Atlantic Division this year. Gave the Lightning a little bit of an issue last season. Not too big of an issue, but still. And this really goes back to how I felt about Tampa as a whole, is that they were not winning the games when they really needed to, beating the teams that we all know they could have been able to beat. So really, this Montreal Canadiens team is going to be an interesting team to watch. I think that a lot of people that are not just Lightning fans, but just people who are the hockey purists. I think that when you ask the hockey purist or just big time hockey fans, who are you watching when your team's not playing? I think a lot of people will say an original six team, and I think a lot of people do watch the Canadians because they're always a hot topic conversation to have, even just the Canadian hockey team, just to talk about any Canadian hockey team, especially teams like the Oilers, especially the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Montreal Canadiens. There's always so much pressure for those teams to do well, and it's very odd, in my opinion, to see kind of Montreal in this kind of weird situation, in my opinion, where they are not a good team. Well, let me rephrase that. They are not as good as they think they should be. If you asked any person within the Montreal Canadiens organization where they would like this team to be on a yearly basis, I think it would be where actually they would switch places with Tampa. And last year they went 1-1 and one catching 3 points against Tampa Bay. So like that also goes back to what I said about this team being, giving the Lightning a tough time of things. But looking at this team, like I said, the big question mark and the big exclamation point next to it is the goaltending situation. Do I think that this team, if they choose to stick to Jake Allen in net, is going to get them above the 55-point threshold again? I I would say no. I think maybe 1 point or less. I think that this team will be in the same situation, but I wouldn't be surprised if they make a move for a goaltender if they're even remotely close to a to a playoff spot. Which obviously I don't think they will. If I had to guess where I think this team will be towards the end of the season, I think it'll be right where they finished last year. If you look at the rest of the teams in the division, I just think that it's a matter, if maybe you stick Montreal in maybe, I mean, I can't really say there's a division in the NHL that where Montreal would be able to thrive. I just think, it gets tougher and tougher. The Metropolitan Division, I guess. I mean, can we really sit here and say that Montreal is better than New Jersey or Philadelphia? Probably not. Um, you know, I mean, you even look at the Islanders, who got off to an incredibly slow start and were able to sort of get it together as the season progressed. 84 points. So, when you really look at this Canadians team, it's really, I hate to say it because I don't think that hockey really comes down to just one factor for a team's long-term season success. I think there's a lot of things that come into play when we're talking about this team and what kind of team they're going to be. And I think as the season goes along, we're gonna still trying to figure out what kind of team Montreal is, because, like I said, I are we gonna sit here and believe that the Marty St. Louis effect is something that is sustainable? Don't get me wrong. I don't think that he's really an X and O's kind of guy in the dressing room. I think that's been stated by multiple people that are a lot more in the know in Montreal Canadiens hockey than I am. But I think he's the master the master motivational person. And I think really with this young team and a team that can only go up from here, I think that that's all this team needs. Now, granted, they're going to have to work on keeping the puck out of the net. And I think they have a decent defensive pairing scheme going right now. Joel Edmondson, Justin Barron, Jordan Harris, Chris Weidman. And then on the first line, you got David Savard and Michael Matheson. David Savard, former Lightning defenseman who won the Cup with them when they played Montreal. So I don't know. I think that they're going to have any kind of impact on this division down the road? No. I think that when you look at this team and where they're going to be in the division, I don't think, maybe things might be a little bit close between them and Ottawa. Trying to make a case for them as to being some sort of team to fear when you see them on the schedule. No, I don't think that they're going to be a team that is going to be, you're going to look at the schedule and be like, oh crap, we just played Pittsburgh and whomever this week. We got the Rangers on Saturday, and then we got to go to Ottawa and go up to Montreal and play the Canadiens. Oh man, that's going to be a tough game. No, it really isn't. Maybe in Montreal, that's going to be a little bit more of a tougher game. Montreal fans are probably still pissed about losing in the Cup Finals to Tampa, but at the end of the day, that's a very winnable game for Tampa, even on their worst night. Especially when he got 88 in goal, and even when you have Brian Elliott, who I thought was very solid down the back end of last year's regular season. So really, what it comes down to is, can Montreal be a team that is going to be able to weather the storm in against the better teams in the Atlantic Division? And right now, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say, do I think they're going to finish at 55 again? No, I think that they'll be around the 63 point mark tops. I haven't looked at the over-unders that BetOnline released for points totals just yet. But yeah, I don't think I think this Montreal team is going to be one of those teams, kind of what we saw out of Detroit last year, kind of what we've been seeing here and there from Ottawa just last year. Just a team that is just going to continue to figure it out, that's going to continue to evolve. The only difference here is that I feel like the goaltending, like I repeatedly say, is going to be a little bit of a question mark and is going to be a little bit more of a bigger focus of worry for Marty Louis and his coaching staff, Marty St. Louis and his coaching staff. So we'll have to check that out. So yeah, and you can check that all out as the season progresses by subscribing to our the podcast on any audio platform, that's Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, wherever they have audio form for podcasts. We are there, as well as on our YouTube channel, Locked On Lightning, and the social media pages at LO_Lightning on Twitter, as well as Locked On_Lightning on Instagram. So wrapping things up here, a little bit of I wouldn't say a laid back episode, but when you look at Tampa and you compare them, as we've been doing throughout our Atlantic Division review, every comparison has been interesting, has been, there's always little things that Tampa could get beat on. And Tampa Bay, yes, they're going to have their issues this year. That's just how it goes. I think that they're going to have a little bit of setback year. I don't think they're going to miss the playoffs, but I don't think it's going to be as maybe a sure thing as we get closer to the end of the regular season. Whether it be finishing in third or on the wild card, I'd have to say, that maybe second or third are still in play, obviously, with how lesser some of the other teams in the Atlantic Division are or might be at certain points. But Montreal, I would have to say on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being no concern at all, to 10 being looking over your shoulder every waking second of every day, in terms of them being a team that is going to be taken seriously in the Atlantic Divisional race. For those 3 spots, I would say a 1. Montreal still, I think maybe next year you're going to start to see them maybe make a turn for the better, kind of like what we have been seeing out of Detroit. But then again, it might be too late for Montreal because of how competitive this division is going to be in the next couple of years. So, will we have to worry about them this year? No, definitely not. Maybe a little next year. But if everything what we saw at the draft is any indication of what direction this team is leaning into, what kind of success they might be leaning into, I would say 3 years from now. Before I wrap things up, I just want to say I hope everybody, if you're a listener of this show, hopefully, everybody's family members had minimal damage or minimal danger towards them during the hurricane, and I hope everybody made it safely out and evacuated in a timely manner. And if you didn't, you stayed safe regardless. So hopefully everybody is doing okay. And the season starts in 8 days. So super excited for the regular season. They open up on the road in my hometown of New York City. So can't wait to see them. That's going to be a crazy game against the Rangers. We'll talk about more of that as we go along. We'll talk about some of the stuff going on in camp as well. Preseason, do we really need to look at what the Lightning have been doing, even though they haven't really been playing that much because of the hurricane, and games being postponed and moved and all this? Is that going to throw them off? I don't think so. I don't think any of these games really mean anything. I think it's more for the young guys to kind of get more exposure to John Cooper, so John Cooper could see these guys firsthand and kind of get an idea of what strengths they may or may not have if he hasn't seen them before. We'll be talking about all of that over the next week, as well as, like I said, we're finishing up our Atlantic Division review for realsies with the Buffalo Sabres. So go ahead and check that out when it drops next week. So that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you next one.